Get your hands on stylish t-shirts, hoodies, and more at wearbuff.com. That's wearbuff.com. And make sure to use the promo code TWB at checkout for 20% off your first order. Stay Buffalo proud with Wear Buff.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo Podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
Bills Mafia, welcome into a very special episode of the Wandering Buffalo Podcast. If you tuned in last week, told you it was our 200th episode, kind of a big deal for us, and just wanted to do a little something special for this bye-week episode and touch base with one of my guys, go way back before Nate even knows that I was following him, but the CTW podcast is one of the podcasts that made me want to get into the game. It's just dudes talking football. There's X's and O's shows out there. This is just kind of, talking with your buddies around a beer, around a water cooler, just talking Bills football. So super excited to have Nate here. Nate, welcome to the show.
Hey man, thank you for having me on, Justin. It's funny you say that with you're one of the main reasons actually why I joined the Buffalo Fan Base Network. I talked with you, and I think you must have even introduced us to Justice at some point, because he got our information from someone, and then that led to me meeting the guys from 24/7 Buff Fandemonium. And when Rumblings collapsed, even before Rumblings collapsed, I was considering a move, and I was like, well, Justin's my guy, right? And then I was like, oh, I like Justice a lot too. He's super cool. And I was like, oh, I met the guys from Detroit. I was like, this just feels right. I never felt that sort of camaraderie at Buffalo Rumblings. Not that I didn't get along with them, not that they weren't good people, but there wasn't that sort of hey man, we hit it off. We would probably be friends if we saw each other or if we grew up or whatever, man. This is a cool vibe. So I appreciate it. Congratulations on 200 episodes, man.
Thank you.
That is not an easy feat. It's not easy.
Yeah, it was quite the journey, and I talked a little bit about it on the last episode, and special shout out to my wife for, keeping me motivated, because, you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. There's times where you're not growing. There's times where is anybody even listening to this? And just kind of keep chipping away, and it's become, more of a passionate hobby for me than anything. And, for a little bit in there, it's punching the clock. And now it's more just showing up and I'm talking about the Bills. What else can you ask for?
Yeah. There's got to be definitely for every podcaster out there is someone, if they're in a relationship, that's helping them out. And I'm glad to hear you say that with your wife, because my wife was the same way. I remember the exact moment I brought it up to her and be podcasting's not that crazy. I don't need a specific studio. And if you're watching this live, I definitely don't have a specific studio. It is my basement. And I've put up more Bill stuff over time, behind me, and I'm still working on it. This is the first season we've done any sort of video, but I remember us having a newborn and doing podcasts. So getting 3 hours of sleep a night, and non-consecutively, and, wanting to talk about the Bills because we were growing some momentum, and I'm I don't want to let it go. And I remember at times in the off season being at Rumblings when they were oh, we're going to record every week. And I'm dude, I am not recording every week in the off season. Dude, the draft is done. I'm taking 2 months off. I want to get some sleep. I want to be with my family. So I did that for sure. And, it was a tough time, but now the kids are a little bit older. But yeah, man, you cannot do this without somebody helping you out, either doing stuff around the house or whatever to help you do that. So I'm glad to hear it's not just me, man.
Yeah, and kind of on what you just touched on there, little disclaimer here before we get into the meat and potatoes. If you're watching this on YouTube, came up to record, had this, predetermined time frame with Nate here, flipped the light switch in our new house for the overhead lights, and we got nothing right now. So Apologies for the dim lighting. I got a camping lantern up top. We're making do. But hey,
it wasn't even like a Christmas vacation thing where like you already put up your Christmas lights and you put them together and it just went out. Just
nope.
like no, just the
Just
homeownership.
one disappointing flip of a switch.
Uh,
All right,
Yeah.
so I just want to kind of get into some bye week topics here, and like I told you kind of off air, I got a few things drawn up, but we're just going to talk about it and see where we end up. So the first
love it.
one I have is, I think this is an interesting one because there's been so many important players come out of the woodwork this year. But kind of like with that everybody eats mentality, it's kind of offense, it's kind of defense, it's different players and depth players stepping up to make big impacts on the team every week. So the first one I got for you, Nate, is your, we'll call it midseason, whatever, bye week non-Josh Allen MVP.
So it's funny that you mentioned this because this was something that I was going to bring up on our podcast later of like bi-week awards. And we do our Wall of Fame, Wall of Shame each week. And I was like, okay, who would be in the Wall of Fame, like not named Josh Allen? And I was trying to think of, some instances of that, like on the offense and the defense, who is like on the Wall of Shame, who is disappointing, who has not been. Uh, you know, Josh Allen is so freaking good that sometimes it just overshadows almost everyone on offense. So I'm gonna give actually one on offense and one on defense, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that one of the best surprises, and also really not that big of a surprise if you watched last year, and one of the reasons why I think the Bills' offense is having success is because of Khalil Shakir. He is, you could say the offensive line. I like the offensive line a lot, and their health has been huge. And I think this might actually end up being one of the best offensive lines Josh Allen has worked behind. So nothing could be said about that. But a player that sticks out to me specifically is Khalil Shakir. He is just so freaking good as far as his yards after catch, his ability to separate and catch balls that are. So I think he leads the NFL right now in catch percentage, or I mean, I guess drop percentage, I guess is really the term because he's the best. He has the lowest drop percentage. And it's like not even close. At least a couple of weeks ago when I checked, he was like first in line. And then there were like 20 tight ends and running backs. And then there was another wide receiver after that. Like that's how good he is at catching the ball. And it's funny because he was good in college, but actually drops were one of his knocks. Like it was one of those things where it was inconsistent, but he has not really had that issue here in Buffalo. And it's catching the ball, which seems crazy to think that that's something that you would need for a wide receiver, but he does a tremendous job, especially for the Bills who have had issues with that in the past, from Gabe Davis, from Dawson Knox, from even Stephon Diggs at the end of his tenure in Buffalo. So catching the ball, the yards after the catch, as far as I'm concerned, Justin, is like something the Bills haven't had in. I literally can't think of the next best wide receiver for yards after catch from Khalil Shakir. I really can. And I've been a fan since the 90s. I remember as a kid watching the Bills go. Maybe Andre Reed then. I guess if I'm thinking all the way back to then, Andre Reed. But like the Bills haven't had that. And the dude is crazy. I mean, his ability to take a ball that's only like a 10-yard catch and make it 30 yards. I mean, they didn't have that with Stephon Diggs. They didn't have that. Stephon Diggs was like a catch and kind of like go out of bounds or like make a move. If a guy got him, then he would go down quickly. Like he stayed in the league for a while doing that. Cole Beasley, again, catch the ball underneath, but then dive for like, first down. No one really stayed on their feet that long. It's Khalil Shakir by a mile. I really can't think of that. And I think he's been, especially you notice when he wasn't healthy against the Ravens, the Texans, I think he missed one of those games. In the other game, he was on a pitch count. Like the Bills' offense suffered a lot. Luckily, Amari Cooper's here, so that helps. So I'm not taking anything away from Amari Cooper, but I think Khalil Shakir is the offensive, the bye week MVP for me. On defense, Go ahead.
I'm going to jump in there because I'll give you mine, and then we'll go to the defense because mine just to piggyback off of you there. It was Khalil Shakir, and it was a pretty easy answer for me. All the things that you mentioned, he's just so much fun with the ball in his hands. He's become that like Josh Allen's go-to guy when he needs that first down. He'll catch it on 3rd and 2. He'll get 3 yards with the catch and then run for another 10. And like you said, we haven't really had that yak guy, and it's something that I've been looking for, since we drafted Josh Allen. Like, oh, okay, we have an unbelievable quarterback, and like he's making all these plays happen. Now we need some of those easy button throws where he can just get the ball to his guy. And we're seeing a ton of that this year with, some of the screen game, some of the check downs. It's just getting the ball out of his hands and letting his teammates go to work too. It doesn't have to be all Josh Allen. I will say James Cook kind of got my honorable mention here on offense, and I don't think he has as like consistently eye-popping numbers or like the same level of consistency. But I made a preseason prediction that, I was super excited about Ray Davis, and he's shown his flashes too. But I had a preseason prediction that Ray Davis was going to end up taking the job from Cook before the season was over. And then this season started, and I've seen a whole new version of James Cook, and it's not like he's not doing what he used to do. He's got that slashing style. He's got the speed. But the level of physicality that he's added to his game, like, it's just bonkers to me. He used to be kind of like down at the first sign of contact, and now you look at a game like we just had against Kansas City, like he didn't have much of a stat line. What he did have is that 7-yard carry into the end zone where he, knocks 3 people on their asses. And just to have that complementary skill set, and we're talking about, guys making it easier for Allen. You're talking a guy like Shakir with the yards after catch, talking about a little bit more consistency in the run game. They've always been kind of like a 60-40 split. The efficiency that you're getting out of the run game I think is really helping out Allen this year too. So I give a little kudos there because James Cook was pretty close on this one for me.
I like that one, by the way. I think I was thinking honorable mention to James Cook. We're on the same page there. He did take his game to a new level. Anything that he does helps. There was a point where, you said your prediction before the season was that Ray Davis might take over. I thought it was going to happen a couple weeks ago, potentially. When James Cook was out, I'm like, this might be Ray Davis's job now. He looked really good. But James Cook he's got, it's funny. They're really good complementary backs. And I want to know your take on this because I think this is the best running back room the Bills have had since maybe LaShawn McCoy and whoever was behind him, or because he was so good. But like, I like James Cook a lot. I like him better than I like Devin Singletary. I like Devin Singletary. I like Zach Moss. I just didn't love him. Like, I love James Cook. I think he is one of the best running backs the Bills have had in a while. He always had the speed. He's definitely worked a lot more inside, like you mentioned. Catching the ball, he's still, I don't know if I've seen a ton from him this year to be like, oh, he's definitely taken a step up there because there were some drops last year. I'm thinking about the Eagles game specifically, and then after that there were issues. But like you said, the bruising style of run, he adds a level that the Bills don't have of speed, and it complements perfectly with Ray Davis because Ray Davis isn't a speed guy, but he's good. I like this. I like this running back group, especially with Ty Johnson as your third running back, when I think he could easily be your second running back on a lot of teams. I like this group the most that I think it's been in the Josh Allen era. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree with that to an extent. I guess I can't get myself fully on board there because we haven't seen enough of Ray Davis, in my opinion. And it's not like that we haven't seen enough for me to like give my judgment on it. Like, I think Ray Davis is awesome. And especially, you were talking about his production with Cookout. Like, I thought that was like straight up going to be his coming out party. Like, okay, we're splitting carries going forward. And then somehow they put the Ferrari back in the garage when Cook was back. And, Davis is still getting some snaps, but with the production that he had, I thought this was going to be, you know, maybe my preseason prediction coming through, maybe at least getting it a little bit more 50-50. What I think is most interesting about this room is when you get into the contracts and, the debate of, do you pay a running back? And, James Cook contract's coming up, and we have a lot of big names to deal with coming up, and Benford and Bernard,
Terrel Bernard, yep.
Groot coming up. You got to make decisions on, the veterans, and Rasul Douglas and Amari Cooper. You're going to keep them. So when you start talking about paying a running back, Cook is probably going to be getting in the 10 to 12 million a year range. Like, does this set up for us to keep that group together? Or is it, we've seen enough from Ray Davis. That might be a conversation for another time. But I think that if I had to say yes or no, I would say I would agree with you that this is probably the best running back room with Josh Allen.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about paying running backs, and you mentioned like 3 huge names that are probably going to get top 5 money at their position. Terrel Bernard, Khalil Shakir. Well, maybe not Khalil Shakir, but he's going to make a lot of money, one way or another. I think the Bills are going to want to keep him. As you said, Amari Cooper. Do they keep Amari Cooper past this year? That doesn't even mention, Josh Allen. Josh Allen is probably going to get a contract restructure in the next year or so, because he is the 18th highest paid quarterback or something ridiculous like that now.
The best value in all of sports.
Absolutely. But that doesn't last forever. So I think maybe Mahomes happens this next offseason and Josh Allen happens the offseason after that. So the Bills just have to prepare for it when they think salary cap wise, which is crazy because I think he still has, how many years does Josh have left? 4? I can't remember, but
that sounds about right. Every time I think I know what's going on with his contract, it's like, there's restructure, redone. And he's actually in the first year of this deal. And it's like, I don't even know when he has a lifelong contract. I'll figure out when it starts and ends when I have to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how about, like as far as the offense goes, before we go into defense, what are your thoughts on the offensive line too? I mentioned that I really liked it. And I think one of my biggest surprises is Connor McGovern, because I think he's held up really well at center. And that was kind of, hey, let's see and hope that it works out, because we let go of Mitch Morris and he's been the best center we've had since Eric Wood. So let's hope that this works out okay. And to his credit, not having played center really since Penn State, he played here and there sparingly in Dallas. I think he's done pretty good, and I think that this offensive line, even with, Mark Edwards as a left guard, like I think they're doing pretty well. Mark David, thank you.
David Edwards.
David Edwards, sorry, for Mark David, like that. So I think they're doing really well as a group, and I think that's credit to Aaron Kromer and the Bills scouting staff. You mentioned making hard decisions, and that was a tough decision. But I'd like to think that when Bean came around Aaron Kromer, he said, hey, is this something that we can do? Because if so, if you think Connor McGovern can handle this, we could save $8 million this year or something like that. And I think it can happen. And whoever's decision that was ended up being a good one, because I think they're holding up really well.
Yeah, the offensive line for me, this is one where, like, Bean erases any doubts that I have in him, and I'll have them again going forward. But I didn't think the offensive line was going to like fall off a cliff, when you're talking about changing essentially 2 positions, right? But really the bigger scale of it is, I thought last year was the best offensive line that we put in front of Josh Allen thus far. So going into this offseason, we're letting Mitch Morse go. We're sliding McGovern over. Now David Edwards is going to be a starter. He hasn't been a full-time starter in like 3 years. And I just kind of had some trepidation that it might take a step back, and it could still be very good, but I wanted it to continue being the best line that I've seen in front of Allen. Oh, not to mention Spencer Brown getting his extension. And, I think we forget so quickly, like, the timing of that extension. It was very much like this guy hasn't really been able to stay healthy, and he hasn't really made the progress that we've wanted him to. And I was in the camp of extending him. I liked Spencer Brown a lot. I didn't expect with that extension to come the level of play that we're seeing from him this year. And I'd argue that Spencer Brown is playing top 5 right tackle in the league right now. And when you go left to right across this offensive line, it's one of the position groups where your strength is in the numbers. It's the sum of all the parts. It's not, oh, we have the best left tackle in the league, but the rest of the guys are dog water. It's the sum of them. Maybe David Edwards is the weakest link on this line, and he's at the very least an above average starter in this league. So just another position where I had trepidation on it, and we're not even getting into the depth that we've accumulated with Alec Anderson is playing a low-key, really big role in this offense as that jumbo tight end. You have Vandemark, who had to come in and play a little bit due to injury, and he looked great. That's not even our preferred swing tackle right now because they drafted Tylen Grable, and he was their preferred swing tackle, obviously dealing with an injury. So it's just not just the starting 5. Like, yes, you want them to stay healthy. Yes, they've been awesome together. The reality of the NFL is we've had immense injury luck on the offensive line. This is going back to last year, but the depth that we're building behind it looks super promising too. So no doubts on Brandon being on the offensive line for right now.
Which is something that he's really struggled to grow, except for I think last year was the first time where you felt like it was a good, solid offensive line. But before that, and I love what you said about the depth, because last week was a perfect example against the Chiefs. Vandemark coming in against a tough Chiefs defensive line, especially because Chris Jones plays a defensive end sometimes on obvious passing downs. So you're talking about a, undrafted second-year guy going up against one of the best pass rushers in the NFL and doing a pretty decent job. Like you mentioned, Tylen Grable isn't healthy right now, and he's supposed to be the swing tackle. And then you have one of the guys I'm excited about is Vampire Granger, the center out of Georgia, to be the backup center. And yeah, I mean, there's not a lot to be unexcited about on this offensive line, which seems crazy because it's been so long since the Bills have had a halfway decent offensive line, even in the, Bean McDermott era. Who are they putting out there? Davis Mills, or not Davis Mills, just like Jordan Mills, just these guys that
Quentin
wouldn't even
Spain.
be Quentin Spain. These guys that wouldn't even be backups on most teams were given starter reps week in and week out.
We've come a long way from Bobby Hart.
Yeah. A long time. Hey, if you can't love me at my Bobby Hart era, you can't enjoy me at my Spencer Brown. It's funny, like you said, Spencer Brown up until a year ago was we were like, is this guy ever going to do anything? And talk about turning around. Like, good hats off to him, man. He's like my most, like, last year, I think it was at the end of last year, I was giving him the or maybe it was at the end of the season when we do our awards. He was the most improved Bill by far. And I think it might have been close with him and Ed Oliver, because those were two guys that took huge steps forwards last year and continue this year. At least Spencer Brown has.
Yeah, I would agree. And I feel like he had that upward trajectory last year, and he's continued going up. So super excited there. Moving to the defensive side of the ball, I guess we can kind of look at this a couple different ways. We can do your MVP. I think that's a little bit harder on defense in general, but especially in this scheme. So I guess we could go like fired up, your biggest surprise, good or bad. Just take the wheel with it.
We've been talking up a lot of players. I'm going to talk down a player, and I feel bad doing this because I think he has the potential, and it's the guy I just mentioned, Ed Oliver. I think he's one of my biggest disappointments this season because he looks so good. I mean, you mentioned the Spencer Brown contract. When Ed Oliver got that contract extension too, it was kind of like, oh, okay, all right. It wasn't like top 5 money. You weren't like, oh, this guy's, getting paid like a crazy, but he was getting paid better than I thought he had produced so far. And I thought that a lot of that extension had to do with potential. And then last year comes out and he's got his hair on fire and he looks like, he should have been paid even more based on how he was playing. And then you also had Daquan Jones next to him, which I think Daquan Jones is kind of taking a step back a little bit this year. You just don't see him a whole lot, making plays or getting as much penetration. Although I did notice him last week he did have that pressure against Pat Mahomes to get that interception on the first drive. I think it was the first drive. Like that was a great play. But mostly Ed Oliver, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more of him this year, especially, what are we, 10, 11 games in? I thought I'd see his number called a lot more often. I thought I'd see him ripping into the backfield a lot more often. It just hasn't happened. And that's kind of, his position, his role as a 3 technique is penetration, get to the quarterback, get to the backfield, bring guys down. I just haven't seen it. It's funny because I was watching an old a highlight of something from the Chiefs game, and I just didn't realize how small he was, except when you're comparing him to, like, it was just some angle in the camera, and I'm just like, wow, he really is small. I mean, big compared to me and you, he's a ginormous. But compared to, these 6'5" centers, I mean, he's not that big of a guy. I know he's strong, but I think he's right now, I'll say, trying to, going a little bit negatively. I think Ed Oliver has some improvement. I think he can show it more the second half of the season, but he's kind of been a disappointment to me this season.
I would say I agree with that to an extent. What I think we're seeing from Ed Oliver is he's not like this absolute game record defensive tackle, right? He's not an Aaron Donald, which can be just fine. There's a lot of players in the league that aren't that. What I think we're seeing with Ed Oliver is that he's a little bit reliant on the guy next to him to help him produce. And for a while in there, it was Star Latulele, and it was, when Star was hurt, oh, Ed Oliver's not making an impact. And I do think that we saw a bit of a step back from Daquan Jones this year, which, it makes sense. He's an older player in the league. I think there's some disappointment for me there too, because I was just all hyped that we were going to have, beginning of the season last year, Daquan Jones back. So I think kind of that combined with Ed Oliver kind of getting right from his injury early in the season, I think we've started to see him on the upswing. The consistency isn't quite there yet. So I don't know what to make of him at this juncture of the season, but I would say, sitting here at the bye week, like, yeah, it's a pretty obvious disappointment as far as this defense goes thus far. Kind of the other side of the coin there, a guy who isn't really surprising to me, but I think maybe doesn't really get talked about enough is Groot. And like, for what this defense wants to do, and as frustrating as the run defense can be at times, because they never leave nickel. If they leave nickel, it's to go to dime. They're never loading the box. As frustrating as that can be to watch at times, one of the sole reasons that they're able to even do that with the success that they have is how much of an absolute monster Groot is in run defense. But then also, if we're just looking at stat sheets, like it's not fair to Groot. There's, he's not in double digit sacks halfway through the season, whatever. But if you're sitting down, you're watching the game, you're rewatching the film, the number of times that he's affecting the backfield is just it, it's so hard to, categorize it when it's not showing up in the box score. But he's been an absolute menace at the defensive end position this year.
Yeah, I like that one a lot. I think he's easily, I think, our best pass rusher at all, and that includes Von Miller. I mean, Von Miller, I don't know, we talked about this on the podcast last week. I don't know if you noticed this, Justin, but it feels like there are times where if he doesn't get a move right away, like he's not killing himself to get to the next spin move or the next, rip move or whatever to do it. Like he's like, and I don't know if that was against Patrick Mahomes and they were kind of trying to keep their rush lanes so that he didn't just peel out of the pocket and run for 30 yards like he did today against the Panthers. One of the reasons why they won the game. And I get that, but Groot is by far their best pass rusher. Easily. He's got to get paid. We got to keep him long term. Would I like him to be, like you say, be double-digit sacks? Of course. But he's also elite against the run. So it's like, well, what do you want? Do you want a guy that has 7-8 sacks a year and is absolutely dominant against the run? Or do you want a guy that has 19 sacks and can't seal the edge worth crap? So if you ask me, the way that this defense is built is bend but don't break. And he's the perfect bend but don't break. He's a perfect not give up a huge play sort of defensive end. And I love him. I think it's funny because if I was going to go with my player, Groot is definitely up there, but I was going to say Terrel Bernard because I think both players, young players, have taken a huge step up from year to year. And the only thing I'll say, and Groot's been really healthy, so we can't really compare it, is that when Terrel Bernard is not there, I mean, it is very noticeable. And you can't even take away from Balin Spector being pretty good in the absence of, Terrel Bernard, or even Dorian Williams I think he's doing a great job without Matt Milano there. But when Terrel Bernard's not there, I swear, if they had Terrel Bernard last year against the Chiefs in Buffalo in the playoff game, they win that game. I think they easily win that game. I don't know how far they go after that, but they win that game. And it's just unfortunate that we never got to see, but he's one of my favorite players on the defense. I mean, you could say Groot, him, Taron Johnson, those are probably my top three. But yeah, I love Groot, man. I hope they pay him. I hope they make him, a long-term bill, and he's got to be, because we don't really have anything opposite of Von Miller, and AJ Epinesa is not that guy. I like AJ Epinesa. I think he's a really solid depth player. Reminds me a little bit of Shaq Lawson in that depth role, but yeah, Groot just has, and I think he can still get better, which is still crazy to me because I think he's really good now.
Yeah, love him. I think he's going to be the first of the pending free agents here to get paid. I just think there's not much going on at defensive end for us behind him. Von Miller getting older. You got some young guys in there, but haven't really seen much from like a Solomon. Epinesa hasn't really taken that next step. So I think Groot's going to be top priority. But Nate, we're getting tight on the time here. So I got one more question for you, and then I want you to tell all the fans where they can find you, when you're coming out, all that. Pretty simple, straightforward one. I'm going to hold you to this. The Buffalo Bills win the Super Bowl this year if...
The Buffalo Bills win the Super Bowl this year if the Bills can stay healthy. I think that's their biggest thing. If you notice, even last week, I don't think the game is as close if Amari Cooper is healthy, if Spencer Brown, even though we mentioned Ryan Vandermark did an excellent job. If the Bills stay healthy, I kind of just mentioned it when talking about Terrel Bernard in the playoffs last year, but that Steelers game in Wild Card Weekend was, the Bills were going to probably win that one just because they had a better team. But at the same time, they lost 3 or 4 really good starters on defense. And then you had an AJ Klein who was banged up and off the couch from 2 weeks earlier. That it was a banged up team and the Bills lost by 3 points. I think health has been one of the biggest concerns of this team. And then the fact that like Stephon Diggs is not there, I think that actually helps the Bills. I think that they will not run into a rut like they might have last year. I think there's a lot of pressure put on them, and I think he was one of the players that put a lot of pressure in the locker room of people being afraid to fail or make mistakes or whatever, even though he made a huge mistake as a drop in the KC game. I think injuries are the biggest thing standing in their way, and then also coaching, because can McDermott handle it when it's that big of a thing? I think also, I mentioned injuries, and I'll try to end this quickly, but Dorian Williams not starting for Matt Milano last year was a huge mistake, I think, even looking back at it. Now, I know Dorian Williams has played really well this year, and he probably wasn't going to play at that level in his rookie season in the divisional playoff game, but I think he'd be better than a banged-up AJ Klein. It was just, to me, it was atrocious that they chose that. I know that they were going for safe over upside, but man, Dorian Williams looks good. And for the first time, Justin, when Matt Milano comes back, which I do have a source that says he will be back for the 49ers game, which is crazy to think that. So breaking news on the Wandering Buffalo podcast.
Sources.
Sources. And what are they going to do? I mean, I know they're going to ease him in, but they actually have, for once, a third linebacker that they can bring in, on any given down. So that's kind of cool. It's something that they haven't had. And Dorian Williams is that guy. So I'm really excited about that. And I think honestly, though, health is their biggest concern. If they can go in healthy, even Josh, he's taken some hits the past few weeks. He's still gotten up every time, but if he can go in, not having issues with his hand, his shoulder, anything else, no concussions, nothing, I think the Bills have a shot.
I completely agree with the injury point, and I think that's not just like last year. I think this has been kind of a common theme when we get to the playoffs. It's been like the last 2-3 years. We have this team going, we get hot at the right time, we start making a run, we're dealing with injuries, and it's never like, I don't want to say any of these positions are unimportant, but it always ends up being like our superstar players. It's the Matt Milanos. It's all that. The last year, Terrel Bernard, Benford playing hurt or getting hurt, Rasul Douglas playing hurt. It's always like these key guys, and you never want to see the injuries happen, right? But I feel like in this season, we're in a position where we've kind of weathered the storm, and you never know what's going to happen, week to week. But kind of on the path that we've been on, we're closer to, having the roster that we expected at the beginning of the season. We're closer to that in like week 11 than we are at the start of the season, right? And we lost Milano before we even started playing football. So I think that, coming out of this bye week, we have a good chance to get a lot of these dudes back healthy. We are in a position within the division that, like, we have a pretty comfortable lead on the division. Miami's showing some signs of life, but I don't think they make the run. So I think we're in a good spot to kind of be able to be cautious with these injuries and be healthy and go into the playoffs with the roster that we want. Not to mention the 1 seed is still very much in play. I told you before the show, I've been working on a fence all day. We just had a little second here to do a little scrolling. The Chiefs almost lost to the Panthers today. And like that's the 1 seed it's ours to lose other than the Chiefs. And we've been talking about the Chiefs all season about how they don't look unbeatable. They just find ways to win games. Finding ways to win games is great. Almost losing to the Panthers is concerning. So maybe we're able to, get healthy, go on this little run. Maybe we're talking another bye week going into the playoffs. We'll see how it all plays out. But I think health is the biggest factor. I think a lot of people would say coaching just based on how a lot of our playoff losses have gone. And I would have agreed with that to an extent until this game against the Chiefs. And I think we'll have to see if it remains a trend. Maybe it was a one-off decision. But my issue that I've had with McDermott over the years, people say he's not aggressive. He's super aggressive. He's one of the most aggressive coaches in the league. My problem with it was always you have Josh freaking Allen as your quarterback, and his aggressiveness, he always decided to go aggressive with the defense. We saw aggressive with special teams. When you think about the DeMar Hamlin fake punt, like, why are you doing a fake punt when you have Josh Allen? Be aggressive with your offense. And we saw that this past week against the Chiefs. You know, all the chips pushed into the middle of the table. You know, a field goal is not enough to win this game. 4th and 2, we're going for it we're putting the ball in Josh Allen's hands. And what does he do? He rips off a 30-yard amazing touchdown. For me, if I was hesitant to do that in the past and I made that decision, that would pretty much put a bow on it. That would be my decision going forward every time after that. It's like, this was a toss-up for me before, but last time I did it, Josh Allen had, I don't know, maybe the play of the year, just running people over and not being denied. So I think in the past, I might have leaned more into coaching will keep the Bills from a Super Bowl this year, but that 4th and 2 against the Chiefs, that was a big moment for me.
What are your thoughts? I know we're running close to the end, but I mean, you brought up McDermott, and I didn't even mention. I think him and Bobby Babich have had a great season. Bobby Babich being a first time play caller, but I think when you talked about McDermott just now, I don't think he gets enough credit when things go well, and I think he gets way too much blame when things don't go well. Because and I acknowledge he's not a perfect coach. I know he has some mistakes, like you mentioned last year, the DeMar Hamlin, like that was crazy. The challenge last week. I mean, there are some things that he does that are kind of boneheaded sometimes. But if you look over the entirety of his career, like he's gotten better in a lot of different areas, especially the aggressiveness you mentioned. Even more aggressive, where I'm just like, I don't know if, I consider myself aggressive on 4th down. Like, I don't know if I do that, and it ends up, like, to your point, that 4th and 2 play to go for it. I mean, what a great call that was. And I feel like McDermott doesn't get enough credit from Bills Mafia, because I've always seen a lot more tweets about we need to fire him, we need to get rid of him. And look, man, like, I know he's not perfect, and there have been times it's crossed my mind where maybe he's not the guy, and he might not be. I'm not saying he is the one to lead us to a Super Bowl, but man, I don't know. It could get so much worse than McDermott from here. And you and I know we've lived, I'm older than you, but we've lived enough Bills seasons where we've seen coaches come in and out thinking that they were going to be better or not, and ended up being terrible. So, I guess the grass isn't always greener on the other side is what I'm trying to say, man. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that whole thing with McDermott?
Yeah, I'll be completely honest because the receipts are out there. I do a weekly podcast. There was definitely a stretch last season where they just weren't playing well, and you could have convinced me, and I could have tried to convince you that McDermott had to go. But kind of like kudos to the organization for not being as reactionary as we are. Granted, we're not always given all the facts, but when you bring up earlier, some of the stuff like with Stephon Diggs and what kind of like what the locker room had to feel like, because we've all worked with somebody that runs too hot and I assume is flying off the handle, and every loss feels like that, and you feel like you can't make a mistake, and you have to be perfect, and you're walking on eggshells. And to me, the biggest difference we're seeing between last year and this year is that little bit. And I think McDermott is a great coach, And he needs players in his locker room that are bought in and that trust him and trust the process. We hear it all the time, right? And I think what we had last year was somebody that was bought in that started being like, I don't know. And not much else has changed around the team. And you see the success we're having in what was deemed to be a rebuild season. I will say that one of the things that the longer McDermott is here, I'm growing to appreciate more is like the infrastructure in place because of the continuity. Like we're looking at, why people deem this a rebuild year when you're letting go of big names like Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde and Tre'Davious White and Mitch Morse. And these guys have been franchise cornerstones for like the past 5-8 years, McDermott's whole time here. But being able to have that same coach in place, that same GM in place, and like every year we're looking game to game, week by week, and they're also planning for the next season every year. So, when you have a guy like Terrel Bernard that you drafted and you're going to let go of Edmonds, and we're all like, what the hell is going on? This was supposed to be an eventual Milano replay. We have no idea what's going on here. And it worked like that. And just guys stepping up into bigger roles. Damar Hamlin, whatever you want to say about him, I know he's not the best player on the field. He's been a pretty good safety for a team with 2 losses on the season. He's not getting burned down the field all the time. So you start looking at some of these depth pieces that come in and take on bigger roles. Dorian Williams, huge one this year. Cam Lewis, a guy that's been in the building for years that, again, not a superstar, but when you need him to step up and fill a role, he knows his assignments. He knows what to do in this system. You get that certain level of expectation of your depth because every team in the NFL has to call upon depth. And what do you do when you get a new coach? They bring in all their own guys. You don't have these dudes in the pipeline that it seems like if somebody goes down, we're able to kind of carry on without missing much of a beat. And that piece of it alone to me, whether or not McDermott is the guy that gets us the Super Bowl, I believe he can. But my philosophy on that is really just the NFL's hard. There's a lot of weird bounces. A lot of weird stuff happens in football. And all you can really do to give yourself a chance is be as good as you can as long as you can. And I think the way McDermott builds his coaches up, the way Bean builds the roster, it just feels like an inevitability that one's going to happen. Is it this year? I sure hope so. But I do have great confidence that under their leadership, one is coming.
Yeah, we were at a bad spot last year at 5-5, and I totally get that because it was bleak. It was bleak for a moment there, but with you mentioned the culture and everything that he's been building with teammates and players knowing their spots. I mean, just Amari Cooper after the game in the locker room last week mentioning how he's felt happier than he's felt in a while as a player, and he's only been here 3 weeks. I mean, if that, it's crazy that he could have that sort of impact. And Amari Cooper's played for 3 or 4 different teams now. That's pretty high praise for a veteran, journeyman, good, talented wide receiver to say he really likes it. He likes what they're building here. He likes the guys in the locker room. He's having more fun than he's had in a while. And that I don't think can be understated. And the only thing I can relate to that, because I haven't been in a professional locker room, I've never been in a college locker room, right? So I can't say that. I've been in high school locker rooms, but that doesn't really count. No one cares about that. But I've been in companies, and I know you work a bunch of jobs. You have worked in different places, and I'm sure you can attest to this, is that when you work somewhere and nobody wants to be there, it shows. And there's egos, there's people trying to point the finger at other folks for not doing the right thing, even if it's their fault or not their fault. It just breeds a culture of, dude, what are we doing here? And in fact, the company I'm with now the best company I've been with probably in my entire career. Now I'm 42 right now, so I've had several different jobs over my career, but uh, I get calls from recruiters or emails, not calls so much, but emails from recruiters saying, "Hey, we got this job in Rochester. We got this job in, another city." And I'm like, I don't really care. Like, you could give me $10,000, $15,000 more, and sure, it'd be great. Of course, after taxes, it's what, like $5,000 or $6,000, so it's not that big of a difference. But like, you look at that and it's like, yeah, that's great. Money is great for sure. But I wake up every day and I go to work and I enjoy the people I work with, and I'm not worried about it. And I like the team. We're driven. We're motivated. We're gonna get the job done, and we're gonna do it the best we can and as quickly as we can. But I don't know, man. Like, it's a different beast than when you're just like, man, I just got to get through today. I just need to get through today, and then it'll be easier. As opposed to like, there's a challenge coming up, and I'm gonna embrace it because I'm gonna meet it head on. There's just a different culture, a different mentality, and that's the only relation I can have to it. And if it's anything like that, man, like, it's worth it.
Yeah, showing up to work at a place that you hate every day straight up sucks. And and kind of to your point there, like it doesn't take much to swing that balance. Like it can even be like, oh, for the most part, I really like coming to work, but you get on that shift with the one person, it's gonna be a nightmare day. Like I don't think we have that in Buffalo right now. And to your point, like the difference between showing up and collecting a paycheck because that's your job and that's where you're at versus like we're all on board, we ride together, going into battle, like it's night and day the difference there. And I think it's super apparent with this team.
Yeah, for sure. What's funny is it can definitely be a company or a job or a place of work, but then it can also be within the group that you work with too, also, which is crazy because at my job where I'm at right now, like before a year or so ago, I was in a different group and I was like, it's okay. Like, I don't mind it. But now I'm in a group where I appreciate it. And culture can not only be like the organization as a whole, but like different facets within it. So, you hear that. We never heard that in Buffalo. Nobody was ever singing Buffalo's praises as an organization before this. Before Sean McDermott was here, you did not hear players say, I freaking love working for Rex Ryan and I'm going to be here as long as I possibly can be. Like, there's a level of love within this locker room that hasn't existed. And it's palpable. You can tell it from the way that this is not just like a hey, like they're just saying this just as, just trying to say it because they feel like they have to. Roswell Douglas, even after he got traded last year, after the I don't know if it was the Steelers game or whatever, but he was just like, I love it here, man. I love it. I love it. And it wasn't just like, yeah, I have to say this. Like, he legitimately does like being here. So, it was amazing. I remember the Mario Williams watch. I don't know if you remember that, and him coming to Buffalo and being like, it taking him 3 days to take the biggest contract ever in NFL history. And it's just like, the Bills don't have to do that anymore. They can pay the guys, or they can pay them a challenging wage and get guys here too, which is crazy. So yeah, it's a different point to be in. And man, if that's because of McDermott or Bean or whatever, both of them combined, then I'm all here for it, man. Like, eventually, give it time. As long as Josh Allen is your quarterback, you will always have a chance. And I think that the possibility is there, and probably in our lifetime, fingers crossed.
I'm hoping for this year. So anybody listening to this show that has heard one of the previous episodes with Nate and myself, there's a reason that we put cutoff time limits on it, because Nate and I are both talkers and we could go all day. Nate, absolute blast as always. We got to make it happen more often. My schedule's starting to get a little bit more tame, so hopefully we can work a few more of these in. But pleasure as always. Before we let you go, tell anybody listening what you got going on, where they can find you, all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, dude, appreciate you coming on, man. This is probably my favorite place that's not our own podcast to talk, man. This is good. You and I have had a connection for a while, and there's been people that have reached out over the years, and obviously Andrew there when he was with you too, and it was just like Like it just vibe, man. So I love that we did this. We did this on my podcast a couple years ago. I got to have you back on as well. But no, we do every week. We're on the Buffalo fan base as well. You can check us out on the podcast network there, or at Circling the Wagons. We have our own podcast feed as well, separate from Buffalo fan base. And yeah, I mean, we do it. We started to do video, like I said, mentioned this last season live through StreamYard, through Facebook, through YouTube, through Twitter. And it's been going well, better than I thought it would, to be honest. So we're growing social media. We're growing. We like to do memes and all that fun stuff. Dude, it's just like you said, man. It's just guys talking fun football. Guys that have, all three of us have known each other since high school. We've been friends for a long time. And it's just fun. It's just fun to shoot the BS around about the Bills, about our favorite team. We did it for years and be like, man, we should do a podcast about this. And then we finally did it one day, and it's been a lot of fun. So yeah, man, appreciate you having me on. You can catch us anywhere on socials at CTW Pod, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, whatever. But this has been a pleasure, man. I was looking forward to this all day, and it lived up to it. So thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, love it. And anybody listening to this show, if you've made it thus far and you don't already follow CTW, do yourself a favor and do it. This is one of my favorite podcasts. It's a podcast that, like I said at the top of the show, I was listening to before I started doing podcasts. You got, some good football insights, some unmatched tangents. The memes are on fire. I remember I'm just casually listening to CTW the one day, and they started talking about grizzly bear running downhill. And if you want to know where we're headed with that, you got to go over to that show and listen to it yourself. But I thank you for joining me on this episode, as always, and we'll be back next week talking 49ers. Until then, go Bills.
Go Bills.